Good morning, friends from the media. Welcome to the Tuesday press conference before the EXCO Council meeting. The EXCO meeting. Because of the epidemic, please keep your masks on and stay socially distanced. Chief Executive. Good morning, everyone. In the past week, the epidemic situation is still under control and stabilizing. For positive cases tested every day is about 200 to 300 cases. It's still at a low but stagnant level. We have not seen the situation we saw starting from mid-April, where number of cases continue to drop. We still have about dozen of cases in clusters. However, we have not seen any signs of a rebound. So I'd say that the epidemic situation currently is under control. In relation to other monitoring indicators, they are all rather stable. They stay at a rather low level. Perhaps I will repeat these indicators. That includes fixed locations and non-fixed locations of sewage surveillance. That also includes restrictions and testing declaration, as well as CTN, compulsory testing notices. On top of that, we have testing requirement in the form of RAT by students and staff members of schools before they turn up for school or work every day. We're talking about millions of tests, but the number of positive cases is rather low. There are also two indicators by the Hong Kong U. One is a real-time reproductive number. For a number of days, I was concerned that it might increase to above 1 and continue to climb. But still, currently the indicator is under 1. The other one is point prevalence. It's 0 for a number of days. So all in all, the epidemic situation is stable. There is another group of figures because we have indicators indicating these critical cases as well as fatality cases. Number of admissions to hospital authority continues to drop. It's about 400 admissions. In relation to critical cases or serious cases, is below 20. Among the critical cases, those who require ICU treatment yesterday was 4. So these figures show that with a high vaccination rate, even with infection, the chance of serious conditions has abated. In relation to other details, perhaps you have read the monthly report on the epidemic situation. This is the 28th report, and it's also the last one before my term ends. I would like to thank friends from the media for reporting the contents of the report to keep members of the public informed of our work against the epidemic. Today is the 31st of May. This is also the commencement date of the third phase of vaccine pass. In other words, if you want to enter majority of premises, you will need 3 doses of vaccine. Starting from the 30th of June, in relation to specified healthcare premises, that is, those under the Department of Health, for non-emergency treatment, you need to fulfill the requirements under the vaccine pass. With the third phase requirement in place, we see that there are more people who have gone to receive their third dose. This illustrates that we need the vaccine pass to boost Hong Kong's vaccination rate. Previously, it was about 10,000, 20 or 30,000. Yesterday, it was a record high of over 50,000 people. To be exact, 51,366 people who got their third jab. for those above the age of 18 with a third dose, the vaccination rate is 57.1%. But there are also people who are still waiting for the required interval before they receive the third jab. And those who are suitable for the third jab, please go get vaccinated for the third dose. It will enable you to enter these various premises so that you can resume normal activity, and it also helps Hong Kong to build a better protective barrier. From time to time, people would ask me, there are other anti-epidemic measures. What will happen to them? Last week, in the same place, I've already given you some heads up in relation to initiatives to prevent importation of cases. They will continue for some time. Currently, we still have about 10 or 20% of the cases that are imported cases. Well, there is BA.2.12.1, a variant that are coming in from the outside. Before the 30th of June, that is within the end of this term, we do not see any room for further relaxation of measures in relation to prevention of importation of cases. Last week, we have made announcements of relaxations. They are minor relaxations or rationalizations, as well as clarifications of measures added in the fifth wave that are no longer in use or they're outdated. Say, for example, the 7-day quarantine at hotel and home quarantine. Before the 30th of June, we will not make any changes. On the 21st of March, I said that in relation to relaxation, we will do it by 3 phases. Taking into account the stabilizing epidemic situation, we have implemented the first and the second phases on schedule. For the third phase, we may be able to implement it in the second half of June. For the third phase, basically, it is the removal of restrictions of premises in relation to capacity, the operation hours, number of people per table, as well as live performance and dancing in bars. Well, I'm afraid that that's what happened in the recent 2 clusters in bars. It looks like we might not be able to implement the third phase in the second half of June. However, it will not have a huge impact on people's everyday lives. There is another areas of work that we can start because of the stabilizing epidemic situation. That is the series of celebratory activities of the 25th anniversary of our reunification. Last week, I said that the campaign has started, and today we will launch for the first time the theme song of the anniversary. It's one Chinese word, 前, meaning going forward, sung by 28 singers, composed, produced, and written by 2 songs. They are Chen Xiukei and Zhang Gasing, the 2 gentlemen. I will show you the song now.
我和你曾同無負眾望，這城市才發光到遠岸。抬頭望，勇敢擔當，
記着成功需苦幹，
如無互助守望，
如何渡過夜寒？ 過雲雨常妨礙着遠望。
到晴朗時同迎候陽光，無用看得到才信，明白努力後才有望。
同留在海港，
同聚焦於前方，在這機遇面前，希望面前好好的鍛鍊。
歲月留相片，開展不忘雙面。讓我心腦袋仍堅毅待，仍建立每一天。而夢想的回音中可聽見。
再無理由行動待明天，前路有阻隔難免，
成就要用未來答辯，回頭望起點，
從未擔心雨天。在這機遇面前，希望面前好好的鍛鍊，歲月留身邊，開展不忘信念。用我心腦袋，仍堅毅待，仍建立每一天。尋夢者的長跑，盡全力領先。在這機遇面前，希望面前好好的鍛鍊。歲月留身邊，始終不忘信念。用我心腦袋，仍堅毅待，仍建立每一天。尋夢者啟程起跑線，在這獅子山下衝刺。願這香港同心一起重現。
I'd like to thank Mr. Keith Chan because this is the second time I work with him. In the 10th anniversary of the Hong Kong SAR, I was a permanent secretary for Home Affairs, and I was also in charge of the celebration events. And Mr. Keith Chan, at the time, composed another song, 始終有你, and this year marks the 25th year of the establishment of the Hong Kong SAR, and Mr. Keith Chan, again, is the producer and composer of the song. So please do pay attention to the lyrics. The floor is open. Please introduce the media organization you represent before you speak, and also use the mic, and please limit to 2 questions. Mrs. Lam, good morning. I'm from Cable TV. As you mentioned just now, recently, we've had 2 bar clusters, and that the third stage of relaxation of social distancing measures won't happen before the 30th of June, and we have had dozens of infections recently. So will there be a tightening of the social distancing measures for bars? And for bar patrons, it seems that they are not complying with the rules. Is it necessary to step up enforcement? And in the 2020 policy address, you mentioned that the Jumbo Seafood restaurant should be revitalized, but the parent company of the restaurant yesterday said that the vessel would be moved out of Hong Kong. And were you aware of this move? Because previously the restaurant was suspended because of few tourists coming to Hong Kong. And now that we're soon to reopen our border, and as you said, we're moving along the path of or the path to normalcy, would you consider reopening the border again? And yesterday, President Xi Jinping said that as far as the electoral system in Hong Kong is concerned, this will be upheld. Does it mean that for the coming decade or so, this electoral system will remain the same? And when will there be universal suffrage? Is it in line with the public's expectation? You asked a number of questions. Against the background of the number of cases progressively dropping in the fifth wave, we have allowed a lot of premises to resume their operation by relaxing the social distancing measures, and inevitably there would be an increase in the number of cases because of high transmissibility of the Omicron strain, and that many cases are asymptomatic and they may not be aware of that they've been infected. And that is why for high-risk groups such as students, teachers, we insist that they get tested by RAT every day to make sure that they are not infected. So as we allow bars and restaurants to resume operation in the second phase, we have also had infections in gyms, fitness centers, as well as restaurants. However, as these premises resume and that there are more activities, and if bar patrons have mask-off activities apart from eating and drinking inside, and also say if we don't allow live performances and yet there are live performances and even dancing and other mask-off activities, for the time being we are not going to tighten the measures. I would just appeal to the operators to strictly observe the social distancing measures so that we have a chance to return to normalcy, so that restaurants can have businesses and people's lives will return to normal. And that is why for the past 2 years I emphasize that we should stay united in fighting the epidemic together. However, the government is also the enforcement of these measures, and the Food and Health Bureau will step up enforcement. Especially we have a coming long weekend, and we will definitely step up enforcement to check the compliance of bars and clubs. And in fact, we have had over a dozen clusters. And in fact, the largest cluster belongs to Sky Cuisine, with more than 70 people infected. As for other clusters, recently we haven't seen any new cases. As for these two bar clusters, the Center for Health Protection would step up contact tracing with a view to curbing the transmission chain. Now, for those who have visited the two pubs, please observe the compulsory testing notices issued and get tested as soon as possible. Second point, along the path to normalcy, we are concerned about tourism as well. And in order to attract tourists to Hong Kong, we need to perhaps do away with some of these measures, because in terms of prevention of importation of cases, we have some stringent measures, such as the 7-day quarantine requirement in a designated quarantine hotel. And this is one reason why we're not able to attract more tourists to Hong Kong. But as I always say, this is a balancing exercise. We need to have regard to public health, economic development, and people's expectations. And we've just relaxed the relevant measures for 2 months. For Hong Kong residents outside Hong Kong, they can return to Hong Kong, and we do allow some non-Hong Kong people to come to Hong Kong. And also if they test negative in the 7th day by PCR, they can leave the quarantine hotels earlier. For the Hong Kong International Airport, previously, we only received some 200 to 300 arrivals. Now we receive 2,000, 3,000, and in a day, even 4,000 arrivals. So we take a gradual approach in returning to normalcy because we don't want anything that would get in the way of ending the 5th wave of the epidemic. You mentioned the Jumbo Seafood Restaurant. When we considered the development of the Southern District, we had the support of the owner of Jumbo Seafood Restaurant, who said that the vessel would be donated to us. And it's not the government's plan to fund the operation of this restaurant because we are not the expert in this regard. And that is why the donor as a partner and Ocean Park back then undertook the project because of another revitalization project of Ocean Park. However, if the plan doesn't come to fruition, then I have no comment on that. Although this has been penciled in the policy address, I won't suggest that public money should be splurged to make sure that this project comes to fruition. Safe to say that I'm grateful for the owner of Jumbo Seafood Restaurant for floating this idea. For the third question, I note President Xi Jinping made some remarks in relation to improvements to the electoral system in the Hong Kong SAR, and I think he has made correct observation. We've had numerous challenges since the reunification because of the flaws in our previous electoral system. We could not guarantee that patriots administered Hong Kong, and that is why some external forces and non-patriots were allowed to be elected and join the political system. It's all under the sun. Say, a electoral member who pledged allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR and yet invited external forces to sanction Hong Kong, affecting 7 million people in Hong Kong. And this is outrageous. And that is why the improved electoral system should be upheld. And I think this is a very clear statement for Hong Kong. Article 45 of the Basic Law provides that in an orderly and gradual manner, as long as conditions in Article 45 of the Basic Law are met, we can still aim at the goal of achieving universal suffrage for the electoral and C election.
The lady at the front.
Mrs. Lam, so this is from SCMP. So first, will residents face any legal consequences if they showed up at Victoria Park on June 4th? Could you state where the red line is, such as will residents who commemorate the June 4th crackdown in private, such as lighting up a candle in their house, violate the national security law? And second, several EXCO members have expressed reservation over a suggestion of senior civil servants received a record pay increase when many people are jobless. Will you or the EXCO considering cutting down the increments for senior civil servants? And third, you worried about the pub clusters, and will you postpone further easing or reduce the capacity per table at the bars? Thank you.
Well, first of all, any public activity in Hong Kong, regardless of the purpose, has to fulfill the requirements in the law. So as far as any gathering is concerned, there are a lot of legal requirements. There is a national security law. there is the social distancing restrictions under the CAP 599. And there's also a venue question. So whether a particular activity has received the authorization to take place in a particular venue has to be decided by the owner of the venue. About the civil service pay, this is an annual exercise. In the last 2 years, the pay has been frozen. This year, yes, the pay trend survey results show that there is a positive rate, especially at the higher level. But as the Secretary for Civil Service has repeatedly said in public, and we have been practicing this repeatedly in previous years, that we do not just rigidly follow the pay trend survey results to adjust the civil service pay on an annual basis. There is a basket of 6 factors. So ultimately, it is for the Chief Executive in Council to take account of the 6 factors to decide on the pay for the civil service. We are still in this process. So for the time being, no decision has been made on adjustments to the civil servants in the 2022 pay adjustment exercise. As far as the third phase of the social distancing measures, as I have announced on the 21st of March, the roadmap for relaxing the social distancing measures should take 3 stages over a period of 3 months in a gradual, orderly manner. But the ultimate objective is to ensure public safety. So in announcing the implementation of each stage, we also have to take into account the actual COVID-19 situation in Hong Kong. Not only the number of positive cases reported daily, but also the hospitalization situation, the risk of community infections, and also the prevalence of this variant of the BA.2.12.1 of Omicron. So as things now stand, we are in a sort of a stagnant situation with the number of positive tested cases staying at around 200 and 300 cases, including local infections as well as imported cases. But there have already been over 10 such infection clusters in the community, especially the most recent 2 cases involving bars. So we will have to take a very prudent approach. And my position at this moment is we probably will not introduce the third and final stage of the social distancing relaxation before the end of June. But the final phase actually involves only removing any remaining restrictions on the operation of these premises. For example, the maximum number of people in a banquet, the capacity, whether it is 75%, 85%, whether it should go back to 100%, and the permission of dancing and live performances. On balance, I feel these activities would not be very detrimental to the return to normalcy of the great majority of Hong Kong people. So in finding a pragmatic balance, as I have been doing in the last 2.5 years, we will have to take a more prudent approach. Thank you.
好，我哋問多最後一位記者提問。我嘅後排最
The lady at the back. Good morning, I'm from Now TV. I'd like to ask about civil service pay. Would you follow the pay trend indicator? Well, the proposal is a high percentage for upper band of civil servants. Would you change the percentage to narrow the gap between the different bands? Just now you talk about clusters in bars, which affects the implementation of the third phase of relaxation. But restaurants are not affected. And if they are not given the full relaxation, wouldn't it be unfair to them?
First question about civil service pay adjustment. The pay trend survey is an independent survey. It's not undertaken by the government. So for the pay trend indicator drawn up as a result of the pay trend survey, this is only one of the 6 indicators for the government's consideration in civil service pay adjustment. And indeed, after the announcement of the pay trend indicators, we have heard repercussions in the community, especially over 7% increase for senior civil servants. Many of the view that this may not be in line with the employment situation and the economic situation in Hong Kong at the moment. And I believe when the Executive Council discusses this issue, they will take into account the above said. And there are 5 other factors to be considered, including inflation, local economic situation, and indeed last year the performance was quite good, but in the first quarter of this year, I believe we recorded a negative figure, and that is -4%. Third point, we need to consider the government's current fiscal position. Fourth point, views of labor unions, in other words, the views and requests from the labor sector, and finally, staff morale. Together with this pay trend indicator, we considered all these factors as a whole. It's not a mechanical exercise. The Executive Council is required to make a decision having considered all these 6 factors on what the pay adjustment should be for this year. The second question relates to relaxation of social distancing measures. As I stressed a number of times, every time when a decision has to be made, it's always difficult because different stakeholders have different views, especially for operators of premises. They have practical considerations of their circumstances. But in order to provide a stable economic environment, we should have regard to the latest epidemic situation, the public's expectations. After we have relaxed social distancing measures for 2 rounds, we have witnessed a vibrancy in the economy, and we have seen more activities in the community, and we'd also like to have celebration activities for the 25th year, and we'd also like to have banquets and other celebration events. Now it's 8 person per table, and it's been another month, and that for the 3rd round of relaxation to be introduced in the end of June, I think it may not be necessary, but still we have a month or so, and we'll keep in view the situation and make a timely decision. That's the end of today's briefing.